and get to know about the different things that are happening on Empowerment Talks. Now, speakers this week, you have heard Snizna, you have heard Yukti, you have heard Gina yesterday with the musical show that she has put in as well. And today is Carole Copeland. Now, she will be speaking about how do you face change in this uncertain times. Now, my guest speaker for today is Carole Copeland Thomas. She's a TEDx keynote speaker, global thought leader, social entrepreneur, and certified international tour manager. She will be speaking about a topic that is how do you face changes in this uncertain times? What is it that we are so much worried about when it comes to changes? So over to you, Carol, to take us through the session. I'll be there all throughout in the show.
Yash, thank you so much for having me on the show today. I want to welcome all of your wonderful watchers and listeners, both on the live stream here in the Zoom room and certainly after the fact. It's really good to be with you today. I have a lot to talk about and would probably take a lot of time, but I want to sort of capsulize the message that I want to bring to you today. And we're talking about why multiculturalism is a worldwide imperative because change is here. When we look at the world that we live in, the interconnected world that we live in, and also the fact giving you high praise, you and your co-founder and Davini, who I have connected with. I'm looking at dynamic younger people, I say that, younger people who have taken literally a change moment that we have in this world, which you've done, COVID starting some 9 months ago, depending on the part of the world that you're in, finally recognized in the United States in March. And the fact that here you moved forward with developing a brand new platform of inspiration, taking a horrible and a horrific situation and literally turning it on its head. So I congratulate you, Yash, and all of those members of your team for what you are doing in experiencing and certainly connecting with people, both in the Middle East or certainly in my favorite country, India, and around the world. It's so interesting because what really attracted me to your topic was one of my early topics was empowerment. I've been talking about empowerment for over 20 years. My first radio program was on empowerment, focus on empowerment. So this is something I've written about. I have a book that I wrote about many years ago on empowerment. So when I look at empowerment connected to change, I'm looking at that fuel that you need to energize yourself to move forward and to elevate your life in a way that's going to be both productive and promotive in terms of how you connect with other people. So here we are in the midst of a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic. As of yesterday, we tragically crossed over the 1 million mark with 1 million people across the globe who have died as a direct result of COVID. Some of those people I've known, they've been my friends who I grew up with in my home city of Detroit. Others live in New York and other parts of the United States. These are people who I know who are no longer, or I know their relatives who are no longer on the earth. And when you look at that 1 million, I am so very sad to say that over half of the million people who have passed away have been in either North America, mostly the United States, or in South America. We have over 205,000 people who have passed away in the United States, and we're only 5% of the world's population. 96,000 in India, about 120,000 in Brazil and other parts of the world. So when it all adds up, we're not talking about a regional pandemic. We're talking about a global pandemic, something that has not happened since my grandparents' time in 1918. When they remember the flu epidemic that took place during that time, and my parents who were just born in 1917. So the change that is already here is going to then direct us in terms of where we're going to be headed into the future. And so I'm looking at, in the United States, a triple pandemic. Number one, COVID itself, where we're just struggling and racing ahead to find proper vaccines. I have a client, a friend whose husband is working on the testing of one of the vaccines. She shared that with me yesterday. We have people all over the world who are trying to find the vaccine that will be distributed across the globe so that we can somehow get a handle on this disease. So COVID is a reality. It's something that we're all facing, and you can't go outside unless you have a mask. Now we have a whole industry that really is looking at masks now, different colors, different types. So that's really taking a situation and turning on its head, as you have done, facing the change that we are about. So the COVID is the first part of the pandemic. The second part in the United States deals with the economy and obviously the economies around the world. We've had an interesting economy that continues to go up and down and fluctuates. Our unemployment rate hovers around 8%, which is very high for us. Typically, it's around 2 to 3%. It was as much as, I think, 13%. So it certainly has come down. We don't know where it's going to be in the future, but definitely the pandemic has impacted us. Maybe not so much in terms of Wall Street and those investors and people who actually have invested in the stock market, but certainly in terms of mainstream America, people who are working, people who are trying to hang on to their jobs, people who are having to work differently now have been impacted by the economy. My own daughter, my younger daughter, who is the same age as many of you in the audience, had lost her job. She has been a teacher's assistant for 17 years, worked in her home school district for about 12 of those years, and directly because of COVID is now looking for another job because she's been laid off. I have another daughter who is a clinical psychologist and has a doctorate in clinical psychology, but she's had to alter her work style because of marriage and children and how to work. So the economy has affected all of us, how we work, whether we work at home, whether we have to work in a building that has to confine and conform to the social distancing norms. That's the second part of this three-legged stool. In the United States, the third three-legged stool deals with racial tension. This is not racial tension that just started looking at change. It's not just something that started back in March or so. We're looking at racial tension that has its roots way back to the forming of the United States. When we look at our history, our shameful history of slavery and all that it brought about, the Civil War, which, happened eons ago, way before my lifetime. But the legacy that it left and simmering discussions that were really not brought to the limelight and brought to the surface where we could have some meaningful solutions in terms of equity amongst all people, African Americans, Latinx, or the Latinx community here in the United States. Those are people of Hispanic origin, Asian Americans as well. Arab Americans, along with all of the other ethnicities here in the United States. It's like a simmering pot that just continues to overflow over and over again right now. You're probably looking over my shoulder at my Black Lives Matter sign, a conversation piece that I wanted to put up because in the United States, Black lives may not matter to some communities. We are having ongoing issues with the police departments across the United States. And what that means when someone by the name of George Floyd, who was murdered tragically on May 25th, our Memorial Day, just erupted into chaos when people witnessed his death over 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That has erupted protest movements across the United States and beyond the United States, looking and examining at Black lives and if they actually do matter. My roots go back, 7, 8 generations here in the United States. I am African American. I wish I had some Indian roots, but I don't. I've had my DNA testing. I'm about 85% African of African origin, but 18% European origin. You can tell by my skin color, but I deeply have a real connection, not only to Africa, but also the subcontinent of India. But when you look at what we're facing, particularly in the United States, and I have to say that I am an American, We're 4 or 5% of the world's population. We have an influence over the world. But we as Americans have to, first of all, demonstrate and walk our talk. That's number one. Number two is that most Americans have to realize that we are connected to the rest of the world. As a diversity professional, that's what I teach a lot about. I'm having a virtual world conference that we'll talk about shortly, because I know how important the world is to each and every one of us. And we in the United States have to do a better job of modeling what that actually means and what direction that's in. So we're looking at a three-legged stool, a triple pandemic. The health disease itself, COVID, the coronavirus that we're tackling and trying to fight desperately all over the world, from Mumbai to Chennai to Dubai to Boston to New York to London to Johannesburg, et cetera, to Nairobi, Kenya, Mombasa, everywhere. We are gripping and grasping for the right solutions for this health pandemic. Then the economy and how it affects and impacts all of us. When you're in a lockdown in the subcontinent, in India, when you're in a lockdown in Dubai or in Johannesburg, that's going to impact your economy. People are going to be stuck at home. They may not be having a revenue stream coming in. There are lots of things that can be well beyond a stock portfolio that can impact people in terms of the economy. So that's the second leg. And then this racial unrest that is being felt, not just here in the United States, but around the world, is that third-legged stool that we are now looking at in terms of COVID and the impact all over the world. So when I look at diversity and multiculturalism, a topic that I have studied, taught, made presentations, now all virtual. All of my work is being done virtually. I've been on Zoom for 5 years. I actually now teach Zoom tutorial sessions to anyone in the world. I'm looking at diversity and its connection to other people. It is the manifestation, it's the management, the appreciation, and the understanding of differences and similarities at the same time. And what does that mean if you are dealing with those differences or similarities in terms of race or age issues or religion or class or socioeconomic dynamics or gender issues or sexual orientation? All of those categories are part of diversity when you look at that. A topic that I like to cover more so on a little bit higher level is multiculturalism. And I think that is something that can be, people can resonate with that all over the world outside of the United States. Multiculturalism is that integration of cultures all over the world and how we interact with each other, because each one of us is either a part of a culture. We work for organizations that represents a culture. We live in communities that can be a culture. Maybe you are an expat. Many of you live in Dubai, but your origins are in the subcontinent of India. So you have a culture in Dubai. What does that represent? Maybe you work for an organization where it's based in one country and you are based in another country, but there's a culture within a culture. So you can have an organization where maybe you have ethnic groups that represent one culture, but the parent organization is in a far off land and that represents another culture. How do you bring those cultures together? So when you look at the study of culture, to me, that is the baseline for multiculturalism. It is a fascinating topic and one that really is a part of all of our lives. Interestingly, back in October, almost a year ago, I had the very good fortune, the esteemed pleasure of presenting my TED Talk for TEDx Waltham. It's one that I worked on quite hard and I rehearsed it. I had a coach. I had certain requirements that had to be met, and it was a thrilling moment to deliver that speech, and you can hear it on YouTube. You can go to my website, CaroleCopelandThomas.com, and you can click through and listen to it. But it was all about fear, facing fear, having no idea that COVID was about to hit us big time. But I actually walked people through the steps of facing your fear, confronting your fear personally on the job, and how to move through it so that you on the other side become a more empowered person. So the connection is something that I love to talk about. It's something that I want to have a conversation with you about, and one that I think we're going to face as we look at our next normal. That's the new word, the buzzword that we're having now. It's not a matter of where we are now. We are not going back to 2019 or January of 2020. That's done. We're in the midst of a three-legged stool, this triple pandemic. And where do we go next as change becomes a part of our daily lives? So Yash, that's where I'm going to stop there and let you fire away. And I'd love to bring the audience in.
Thank you very much, Carol, for touching a lot of issues that are happening in the United States as well as globally. And a lot of economies and a lot of countries have been struggling on those issues. There were certain specific aspects that you touched about, the racial issues that has been predominant in the United States for a while. But I love listening to those, and the deeper aspect that you touched about, that was about the multicultural aspect and the diversity that you want to do. Now, I want to dig a much more deeper into when you say about the multicultural aspect. What does it mean? Do you mean in the physical world, or do you mean it in the corporate world or in a social world? And how does a person go about dealing with it? Because I have certain rules or certain regulations or certain things that have been imbibed in me because of the culture that I belong to, and that has been the case for each one of us here. So, and being in Dubai gives me that, I'm thankful that I'm in Dubai, so that I'm in access to so many of multicultural people and can understand from them. But what is the exact definition of multiculturalism is all about?
Multiculturalism deals with many cultures. And when you look at a culture, you're looking at a distinct group that represents either shared characteristics, shared heritage values, shared cultural norms, or shared commonalities when you're looking at an organization. So I'm going to take Widget Company Global XYZ, and you have 25,000 people working in that organization. You have people working in the United States. You have people working in Dubai, working in Mumbai, Bangalore, working in London, maybe working in Nairobi. So you have different locations around the world for that one large organization. But within that, you have different cultures based on either research and technology, maybe the finance department, maybe human resources, maybe people who are working strategically on the strategic plans or the engineering designs that will affect the products going forward. So within that 25,000 person organization, which is one culture, then you have cultures, you have subcultures inside of that particular culture. Now, there was a famous anthropologist who looked at the iceberg of cultures, and I use that a lot in the teachings that I have. So you and I may look at each other, and you may look at my skin color, and you'll say, "Oh, she's a Black woman." In fact, when I go to India a lot, because I was just there in February taking a group, and people look at me and they think I'm from South Africa. Well, I'm not from. I have no roots in South Africa at all, but they're looking at my skin color. So it's not very, very dark. It's this color. And so they say, "Oh, well, she's not Indian. So, she has to be from the culture of South Africa." So people look superficially at culture and make determinations. They make judgment calls. It may be right, wrong, or indifferent. So you have that aspect of culture. But then you also have cultures that go deeply beneath the surface. That's the iceberg. All of those things way underneath that we act upon, that we make judgments upon, that we look at this 25,000 person company that I fictitiously made up. And so you may have subcultures. Maybe you have an inner group of maybe 15 employees who are in the C-suite who actually run everything that has to do with this 25,000 person organization. That's a culture. So you can have subcultures within a larger culture. They all intermingle, they intermix, They are a part of a larger institution in this case, but it's understanding the groups within the groups and navigating those groups and politically being savvy enough to understand how to leverage your skill sets and your alignments, your relationships within this 25,000 person organization as to the outcome that you're going to have from a professional development perspective and success within that particular culture. Now, that was a hypothetical or a theoretical case. I deal with clients like that all the time and figuring out all those kind of cultures. I'll give you another example in terms of culture, Yash. And the thing is of time and how people have a relationship with time. You have to be careful about cultures because cultures, if you're not careful, if you make judgment calls on it, it will turn into stereotypes, which we want to understand and manage and stay away from, because that's taking a broad brush approach to people and organizations, and you think everybody operates that way, and it shouldn't do that. But when you look at the whole time factor, in the Black community, I've actually written a guidebook called Understanding Black Culture. Again, it's not one culture. It's the African-American culture. It's the people who come from the West Indies. It's the Caribbean culture. It's the African culture, people who come from that country. That's the Black community in the United States. But when you look at time, so often when you look at the Black culture and we have a relational sense and a relationship with time, different from the European culture in the United States, sticklers for being on time, starting things maybe 30 seconds early so that you won't ever be late. Well, that's looking at what we call CP time in the United States, colored people's time. That's the, if you're in the Black community, you know what CP time means. You may be 5 minutes fashionably late, half an hour fashionably late, whereas your European or American, white American colleague will be absolutely on time, or maybe 15 to 20 minutes early. So we laugh and joke about that, but there are decisions that are made about that. But because I'm a global professional, I know that there's Indian time because I've heard it. I've heard of African time. I've heard of Jewish time. So again, this whole relationship about time.
What's the Indian time you have heard about?
Pardon me?
What's the Indian time you have heard about?
What state?
What's the Indian time you have heard about?
Oh, just about being just fashionably late. 10, 15 minutes, Indian time, right? So, but sort of connected, looking at time, connecting time with culture. So I'm humorously looking at that. That's one way at looking at culture. There's certain expressions you can say. In my culture as a Black person, because church is so important and we have the spiritual base, this Christian spiritual base. In our culture, if something happens and someone in the Black community says, "Lord Jesus, have mercy." Well, I know what that means because I'm a Black person. I know that's, oh my goodness, that's just absolutely horrible. Thank you, Jesus. That means, oh, that turned out really well. So we have those kind of phrases and that phraseology in the Black culture where you instantly understand and you know where that person is coming from.
That's a very holistic answer that you have given to that question. And you did touch a bit about culture and stereotype. You did mention the difference between that thing. And I think there's a very thin line between that when it comes to the culture that I'm talking about being the predominantly shaping your reality and shaping your thoughts that comes to your minds, and or I can say the shaping the boundaries aside you, like you belong to a certain culture and you can't go about doing certain things in that. And so what exactly you meant about when you describe the difference between the culture and the stereotypes?
I fell in love with India in 2014, having wanted to come to India, to go travel to India for a number of years, out of curiosity, out of fascination, out of my study of diversity and global diversity and multicultural issues. And first said, I won't be able to afford to go for some time. My kids are now grown. I have grandchildren, et cetera, sons-in-law, all that kind of stuff. But this was, almost 8 years. This was 2014, 2013. So 7 years ago. Fortunately, things worked out where I was able to come to the country in 2014. And as soon as I got there, it was like love at first sight. I just instantly fell in love with the people. I fell in love with the atmosphere, the colors. As you can tell, I love colors and the clothes, because I have a whole closet full of Indian salwar sets, all of them. And so for me, it was embracing. It was like, I'm not home, but I'm where I should be, if that makes any kind of sense at all. I've traveled around, spent a lot of time in Chennai, been to Jaipur, your hometown, been to Mumbai, been to Kerala, to the state of Kerala, love Goa, love the food all over that part of the western part of the subcontinent. And so I went all in so that I would begin to separate my stereotypes of what I thought I knew about India from the actualities of the cultures, because it's not just one culture, many cultures, many languages of India. As I bring people, and I had a group as recently as February, right before the pandemic hit, and we had a great time. There are other people here in the United States who won't set foot in India because they have bought totally into the stereotypes, the poverty, the dirtiness, as some people have told me. I'm not just making this up. And because of their own concepts of what they think the country is and what it looks like, and they haven't even set foot there. So that's where a person is led by their stereotypes and not by their realities, because they can't separate. They don't have the capacity to separate culture from stereotypes, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, that's a very valid point made, because until and unless, so I would accept that I had certain notions and stereotypes in mind about a certain place being like that, or a certain book like that, or a certain influencer like that, or a certain people like that. So, uh, how do you go about breaking those stereotypes? Because you may not have the experience, or you may not get the chance to explore each and everything that you have the stereotypes about, and those are just framed into your mind. So is there certain things that you do to not to have those stereotypes, or not to have those preconceived notions about the things that all of us kind of have?
Absolutely. Number one is no one's traveling right now. And I'm very connected to the travel industry. They're hurting, they're suffering quite a bit. But you can travel virtually. You can take advantage of millions of videos on YouTube where you can explore the dynamics of different countries and different cultures, different foods, etc. So right within the confines of our home, for virtually no cost at all, we can really explore and differentiate between our own stereotypes and that whole notion of culture. One book that I'm going to recommend, I have a lot of books I could recommend, but this book just came out and I put it in the chat room. It's called Caste, Caste, by Isabel Wilkerson. She is an African-American journalist. She wrote a wonderful book called The Warmth of Many Suns, which traced the journey of Black people moving from the South to the North and to the West, which involves my family as well, between roughly 1900 and 1970 or so. And this is her next book up. But she's not talking about the caste of India. She's talking about the caste of the U.S. And even I, for probably 20 years now, I have a whole model that talks about the American caste system that has white men at the top, has white women, because white men historically could own land and they could vote. And then white women And then indentured servants, they were, I call that America's first workforce, temporary workforce, because they would come over to the US, work for 7 and 8 years. They were poor, they were prostitutes, they were from jails of Europe, and they came over and they finally bought their freedom, and then they moved up and now they're gentry, and you'd never know that they came from pimps and prostitutes in England or whatever. That's that level. Then you have the American slaves, my ancestors, 3/5 of a person, not a whole person, 3/5 of a person. And then the indigenous people, the Native Americans, the first Americans who didn't even become citizens in the US until 1924. So that's the American caste system that I created 20 plus years ago and that I teach from. Isabel Wilkerson has taken it to a much larger level, again, looking at the US and how we use our stereotypes, use our manipulation of culture and the relationship that we have with other people. And there are lots of other books, but you can look at it from that framework. But I would say that it is first a lifelong commitment that people have to have. I really believe in lifelong learning. I'm not going to ever retire. I want to work until I drop because there's so much that I want to do and so much I want to learn and people I want to meet like you, Yash, and all of the others who are here, Ram, who's here, and Bhavini, who I've connected with. I want to have better relationships and broader relationships based on what I can learn and what I can pass on to other people. So I think people have to take it upon themselves to really become lifelong students and to realize that right now, where we are right now in the midst of this pandemic that is not going away anytime soon, that we have to pivot toward our future, and that may mean discarding some of the stereotypes that we've held on to for too long.
I just love the way that when you say about being a lifelong learner, and I'm at a very young stage, but I'm totally imbibed by the fact that there's so much to learn in this world and so much of domains to explore and so many things to do much more. And it's good to hear that who from a senior person like you that you still have that eagerness. Now, being a lifelong learner is fine, but what about being a lifelong preacher or a lifelong teacher? Why is it that important for you to go about saying the things that you have learned to the communities? Because communities any which ways is there. How, why does it becomes important for you to become a lifelong preacher now?
I have a responsibility on many fronts to share information that's accurate because I know people read literally everything that I say. I have an e-zine that goes out to a couple of thousand people. I'm on Facebook. I had my talk back session with the Multicultural Symposium series last night on Zoom. So I have people who follow what I'm saying and they're interested in what I'm saying. And I have a responsibility to be as accurate as possible, even if I'm denigrating my president of the United States. We could get on that subject in terms of how I think has just had a heinous record in terms of being our quote leader. And I'm definitely supporting his opponent, Joe Biden, for a number of reasons. But I look at the accountability that has been lacking in terms of his leadership. So, yes, you asked a very good question. And the thing is, if I'm promoting global diversity, multiculturalism, understanding and learning a lot about people, I have to be transparent as a leader. So if I'm talking about lifelong learning, it's not just for other people, it's for me too. So if you were to look in this office, you have see my virtual background here. I have an office filled with books. Some of them I've read, some I have not read. But it gives me the invigoration and the excitement to know that there's so much more that I need to know about. I am the third generation college graduate in my family. My parents were college graduates. They've passed away. My grandparents were college graduates. My daughter has a doctorate in clinical psychology. So I come from a long line of educated people in my family. So learning is just the norm with us. Going to college is the norm in my family. So that is my floor. My ceiling is seeking truth and looking for truth and sharing those nuggets of truth to other people, even if it's not popular. At this
Wow.
point, I don't care if people don't like what I'm saying because I am speaking a level of truth that people need to hear. So if people have their heads stuck in the sand, about 35% in the United States who are supporting the person in the White House right now, I can't reason with them because they're so locked into a lie, and a lie that's being perpetrated by a man who only spent
No,
750 US dollars.
I love the analogy you did about the floor and ceiling, and that analogy can be used for so many other things that we do our life. That was I also love the way you described it. That there are certain norms. Going to college is the norm. Going to doing, but going about preaching has to become that norm. The the difficulty here happens is, and you mentioned it in your response to my question, is about the transparency, and I will take a bit higher and authenticity. How important is that? Because you may say that I may say to myself that I am transparent, and every other people who are sitting in the White House or everybody whosoever it is, you can say about saying that I am being authentic, I'm being transparent. But how, as a seeker, you know that Carole is speaking is authentic, or is Carole speaking the truth? You can go about preaching truth, but how does a seeker validate it?
When I have conversations weekly with my 12 and 9-year old granddaughters on Zoom, recorded, and I can talk to them about the society, going back to school every other week because they're on a hybrid model. And they talk back to me about their lives and even about politics. And I don't have to either hide my feelings. I don't have to apologize for my life and what I've done. That's transparency. Now, that does not mean that you make all the right choices. I've made a lot of choices that have cost me financially, otherwise. So your life is not one where it's pure and you're blameless, or you don't make the kind of mistakes that one makes as a human being. Transparency is being very clear in your purpose in life and your focus in life. I created a vision statement for myself in 1999, 1998, at a very, very tense time in my life. I had lost my 17-year-old son in a car accident. He just graduated from high school with his twin sister. He was going off to Morehouse College, the school that Dr. Martin Luther King attended. I thought he was going to become a lawyer because my brother's a lawyer. All that changed in the twinkle of an eye when he tragically was killed in this car accident. Then my mother died 11 months later. It was a horrific time period, but in that time came a very clear vision statement that talked about Carole will capture and embrace empowerment and diversity all over the world, and things that I hadn't even done at that point in time. But that became my marching order in terms of where I needed to go and how I needed to approach and build relationships with people all over the planet. That's transparency. And when you live up to those kind of ideals, knowing that you're going to have trouble and stuff to happen all the way, but you can sit down and look somebody in the eye and declare who you are and declare the obscenities that are taking place politically in the United States. That's transparency.
That's a very well said. And just to conclude our session on the YouTube, that for the YouTube audience who are watching us over there, I want to ask you one question, that is, how is your feeling coming to Empowerment Talks, and some wonderful words for the community that we have created, and how all of us in the audience can be that lifelong preacher through this community?
My saying has always been empowerment begins when you believe in yourself. That's the important place where you start. It's a matter of understanding that, yes, you belong to one particular culture, whether it's an Indian culture or a Pakistani culture or a UAE culture or a culture that is based in parts of Africa. But understanding how you can build relationships through lifelong learning, through asking questions, through sampling foods and experiencing things in a way that will help enhance yourself as a person, and it will make you a more empowered person. I hope that you will join me at my virtual multicultural conference that's taking place on November 5th and 6th, free of charge to anybody in the world. You can go to CaroleCopelandThomas.com and learn more about it. We'll actually have registration that will open up at the end of this week. You can go on and get registered. We'd love to have you to be a part of it. I'm inviting my friends here at Empowerment Talk to be a part, an active part of this conference. We're going to have probably some 30 plus speakers that will talk on a wide range of topics. So of crystallizing and understanding what does it mean to be a part of this new normal, or this next normal that we're a part of. What does it mean to go back and share your knowledge and help other people, bringing them along so that they can be a part of the change that we are here now experiencing in our next normal? We're going to have a great time. This will be my 14th conference, and I am looking forward to it. So again, you can go to either my name, CaroleCopelandThomas.com, or MSSConnect.com. Registration will open up at the end of the week.
Thank you very much, Carol. I will be there on the conference as well. So for all the audience who want to join in the conference, the dates were there. The dates were 18th and 19th of October, right?
No, the 5th and 6th
5th
of
and 6th
November.
of November. So stay, just go to her website and you can get connected for that conference. So thank you very much, Carol, for joining. And thank you very much for all the viewers on the YouTube for listening to this Empowerment Talks on the daily basis. And do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you very much for joining. And
Okay.
now